He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 25 years of experience. Together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. We're back again, Henry, and today we have another special guest. This one is someone that I've admired for many years, actually I can say decades, since he first came out with his book, Hey Whipple, Squeeze This. It's Luke Sullivan, former professor Luke Sullivan. He's worked with Fallon, Tom McElligott, and some other great heavy-hitting agencies. Let's listen to our conversation with Luke. Henry, we're back with another episode, and we have an amazing guest, someone I've admired for a very long time, and I think anyone in the ad business would feel the same way. Professor Luke Sullivan, who is the author of Hey Whipple, Squeeze This. In February, the 6th edition is coming out. So we're really fortunate to have Luke joining us today. Luke, thank you for gracing us with your presence. For those of our viewers who may not know who you are, could you just give us a little background, tell us who you are, and then we'll get started. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, you guys, for having me on. And yes, I got into the business in the year 1979. Way back when I worked at very good agencies. My first creative director was Hall of Fame copywriter Tom McElligott. And then I worked for Mike Hughes at the Martin Agency. And then I worked at Fallon in Minneapolis for a good 10 years. Then I went to an agency that must not be named because they killed me in a palace coup, but for 5 years. And then I went on to GSD&M, a wonderful agency in Austin, Texas. And after that, I became a professor, started off as the chair of advertising, and then spent 10 years teaching at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design. They recently forced me to resign because I did not want to teach in class on ground. This happened last fall, and I said I don't want to teach. I'll be happy to continue teaching, virtually. But they said, no, that's breach of contract, their words, and they forced me to resign and fined me $5,000 to boot. This was during when Georgia was glowing red on the New York Times COVID scale. Anyway, but I loved the students there. I didn't love the school, but I loved teaching the students, which is why I wrote the book in the first place. As you said earlier, in 1998, a long time ago, that first edition came out, and it's doing something right because the publisher won't publish things that don't sell. And now we're into our 6th edition. I was telling you earlier about a little social post I wrote, and you can put it up if you want. There you can see the 6 covers and the years they were all published. And then at the very end there, you can see we try hard, which is really what I'm trying to do, is to improve this text over the years, just make it better and better and better. And part of it I have to do because the industry is changing so much all the time in terms of the technology. Well, interestingly, what doesn't change really, well, no, I was about to say what doesn't change is strategy, but it also changes because of the media landscape and the business horizon and the kaleidoscopic ecosystems of the various media, like social media, et cetera, et cetera. So briefs do have to this is not about the single-minded part. The single-minded part will never change. It will never change. In fact, and I'll turn it back over to you in a second. The third chapter of my book is about strategy, and the subtitle of that is why you can't hammer in a nail sideways.
Okay.
That's why you need a single-minded.
Yeah.
I
love that.
Yeah, I'll send you I'll send it here. My little visual that I used to use in lectures of an imprint of a nail. I pounded into my back decking, and you can see the imprint there. It didn't go in. I have to use
Shocking.
Yes. And I think this is why there's points on the ends of arrows and stuff.
Yeah.
It,
So they go in.
it goes in.
Yeah. The opposite analogy is one that I like to use, and I forget if it was in the first book or the second book, but a guy can fall asleep on a bed of nails if there are too many points.
Yeah. Yep. Ain't gonna fall asleep on one nail, I'll tell you that.
No, no. Well, yeah, you'd have to be, without any feeling, but yeah, you can't. It's not
Or
possible.
inebriated, I think that too would suffice.
Right, right. Well, we're excited. As I said to you before we started recording, I have my pre-order already in with Amazon. So the day that your book comes out, it's going to be in the mail to me. And if it's delayed, I'm going to be very upset.
Me
And I'm
too.
really counting on that 2 day. I'm really counting on that 2 day Prime delivery so I can get it, because I haven't seen a copy in quite a while. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I had help from a previous student named Rushel Nadkarni, who was my student and then was one of my first students to go work at the Martin Agency. He's kind of a big shot there now, and I paid him, but I'm sure he could have made a lot more money with a real author. But he did the cover and all the internal illustrations, and so thanks to him, the cover looks the way it does now. And by way of having a mutual admiration society, I too bought your book, and I think I blurbed you for. Did a blurb for you.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Because
I appreciate that very much.
And I signed that book to my kids in my strategies class for the 5 years or so that I taught that, because even the book itself is single-minded. It doesn't. My book is all over the place, really. There's, it's an intro book, and it kind of has to be.
You have a broader topic.
Yeah. But yours is single-minded. It gets to the point. It makes it several times and shuts the hell up and leaves. That's the proper way to do it. That's the proper way. And you don't go on and on. It's why I keep running after you catch the bus, as they say.
So
yeah, it's funny. I've had some people ask the question rhetorically: do you need 99 pages to explain how to write a single sentence?
Yes,
And of course, they answer the question that's unnecessary. But yeah, you do need to explain how it all comes together. So Henry, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if a recurring topic here is the state of the industry. I've been in the business 25 years. Howard was in it for a long time before he started teaching workshops on brief writing. You go back. So our industry is notoriously always contemplating death and doom. What is your take on the current state of the industry?
I could do some crotchety old guy observations on one hand, get off my porch kind of stuff, which I have some of those opinions. And then I have some more thoughtful, maybe probably wrong prognostications about where things are going to go. Here's an old one everybody hears. This is a crotchety old guy. But it's true. The biggest, the chief lack I saw in every student, no, not every student, most students that I had over 10 years was the inability to write a clean paragraph. That's our school systems in America, and it's nobody's fault. It's just sort of the way it is. Well, we could fix it, but the ability to have a clear thought, to state that thought, and then follow it through, even with just 4 follow-up sentences, I saw lacking. Not completely absent, but sorely lacking in most students.
They're not diagramming sentences in high school anymore, I don't think. And
high school, grade school.
Yeah, exactly. Things that we used to do. I agree. I think the part of that, I think, is driven by the technology and the sound bites, and everything is short and 244 characters, and we're getting sloppy in a lot of ways. It's interesting. I was hearing somebody speak the other day, and they were talking about a lot of these things are self-reinforcing. Like the news media gives us shorter and shorter sound bites, right, to talk about more and more complex issues. Like you alluded to the pandemic. These are very complex, nuanced issues. They're layered, yet we're supposed to get in a 90-second piece, some sort of overview. And then you see that there's like long format conversations are doing very well, like long format podcasts and things like. So somebody's right and somebody's wrong, and I think that there still are people out there that yearn for well-written English. There are people out there that yearn for deep conversations into deep topics. So
Yeah.
I think people will read long copy if they're interested. That's
Yeah. Now, I never taught, let's do a long copy ad in my classes, because that's a 0.001% of the job orders you'll get at agencies anyway. But what it makes you practice is clarity of thought, to begin a narrative, carry it through, and conclude something. And so, but it's a lifetime of reading and writing that results in a student who's ready to take a business brief, a business problem, and then come up with an idea and then present that idea, whether it's to the client or to the customers. The idea, do it compellingly, clearly, and begin a narrative that just goes like that. I don't see that clarity of thought as a strength of our citizenry. But you know what? It never was, actually. It never was. I was hoping to see it in the niche of kids who show up at an art school studying advertising, but I didn't see it there either.
Related to that, Luke, and building on Henry's point, Henry and I have talked about the issue of comfort level among students with the notion of selling things. Do you get in your time with students, did you find that students are actually okay with the idea that they have to sell a product, even if it's not one that they necessarily would buy themselves?
Overall, yes, I didn't see a problem with that by the what you call it, that group, that target market, if you will. Yeah, every once in a while there were students who were getting into advertising for reasons I'm sure they weren't even sure of, and they probably liked the creativity side of it, but they realized they were going to be working for clients and sometimes products they don't care about, Lay's potato chips. So I'm not really going to be working weekends for Lay's potato chips. And they couldn't get comfortable with that. I might have converted one or two in my time there, made them see that what you're going to do, yeah, you're going to sell Lay's potato chips more than half the time, but you also have the opportunity to practice a craft that is pleasing to you aesthetically, and then occasionally please you politically as well, because you can do good for the world. But overall, no, I didn't see students with the problem. They all got to choose their own products anyway. I never signed a product. I had a list, and there was no problematic items on that list.
I sense a trend that the balance toward wanting to save the world versus understanding that they're putting their talents, to sell products in a market economy is shifting, and they see advertising as a way to save the world as opposed to a way to make a living, a way to, sell products that some human beings make and other human beings voluntarily buy, and for the benefit of everybody. And of course, there are any product that if you overdo it, if you eat too many of those Lay's potato chips, they could be bad for you. But at the same time, having an economy in which we're all producing for each other and telling each other about the things that we've made, I don't see it as inherently evil, but there seems to be a strain of thinking that sees it more and more as evil. And I ask myself, why do you want to get into this business then? Because you're jumping in at the lowest rung of the ladder, where you're going to be, as you said, working weekends to sell Lay's potato chips or Tampax tampons or Coca-Cola or whatever it is. And, you got to be a masochist to get into it if you don't agree with the mission, I think.
Well, and if you get too woke about anything, you end up in a sort of paralysis. It reminds me of my mother, who's still alive, 98 years old. And when the Mall of America was being built there in Minneapolis, where I lived at the time when I was working at Fallon, the Mall of America, and the news was on this huge, citadel of capitalism. And it just bugged my very liberal democratic mother, as I am too. But she said, I'm never stepping foot in there. And I said, Mom, that dress you're wearing, what, did you fucking grow it? No, it came from somewhere. Deal is, this shit exists. And if we get too woke about anything, we probably can't step foot outside our door. But when you use this sort of conscious, mindful capitalism, and when as I added in the last chapter of this new edition, I added some thinking from two friends of mine. One is named Deborah Morrison, who's just an absolutely beloved professor, started off at the University of Texas in Austin, and now she's got a program up at the University of Oregon in Eugene. And God, the students love her, as do I. I invited her into my class. I had to sneak her into the scan, said no bringing in other people from other places. And she gave one of the best speeches I've ever seen. And it was her putting together all of her thoughts, or condensing her thoughts about working for companies that don't do harm to the world, don't do harm to people, that are here for reasons beyond just making money. Yes, the company needs to make money, otherwise it can't exist. And she just laid it out beautifully. So I added a section to the last chapter of this book, and I also included David Baldwin. David Baldwin, who's the owner of Baldwin and in North Carolina, and he has a whole book about what he would call conscious capitalism, which is where brands need to return to their purpose. What would the world be missing if your brand disappeared? AT&T. Nobody would miss anything as long as I have some other one of those. All they do is make money. That's all they do. But if a cool brand like, I don't know, Burt's Bees, that's one of David's clients, you wouldn't get that kind of cool, super. Something would be gone if you didn't have Burt's Bees.
So,
and just a quick exploration of why your brand is here in the world should be enough for you as a junior to decide, do I want to continue working on this brand? So as a junior, as you get into this business, the only time you get to pick what you're going to work on is before you sign on. Because once you get into an agency, you really can't say, oh, I'm not going to work on that, but I work on this. You've got to, that's kind of I think you mentioned Henry a minute ago, the bottom rung. When you get on the bottom rung, that's an agreement you have to make with yourself. Can I work on everything that's in this agency right now? Sorry.
Yeah. I was gonna say that for me, there's a difference between. I think the danger is brands that produce or make a good product or service are not content enough with just making a good product or service that's useful to people and not doing harm or not intentionally doing harm to anyone, versus having this overinflated idea of, through Starbucks coffee, I'm going to save the world, right? And so I agree with you. I don't think that corporations should be doing harm. But I still think there's value in a company that makes a product that's useful to people and the people want, and that it's a good product that does better than the competition without harming something or someone, or exploiting something or someone. I think we've gotten a little bit over our skis as an industry with this, like, I guess people are embarrassed at cocktail parties to say, hey, I'm the marketing director at Starbucks or whatever. It's like, providing a good cup of coffee to people when they want it isn't a bad thing, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, let me pivot here, Luke, and I recall we had last week as a guest, we had Dave Dye, the legendary British art director, and he has podcast. He has a podcast, and I listened to his interview with Tom McElligott, who has been a bit of a shy character recently. He's been hiding away, and he was fortunate enough to track him down. And I was fascinated because I've lived in Minneapolis. I worked at Cole McVoy for about 5 minutes as a freelancer. I also worked at Campbell Bethune before it shut its doors. But this is long after you were there. But one of the things that fascinated me about the interview he had with Tom McElligott was that Tom admitted that when he got his first job in retail working for Dayton's, he had no idea how to do an ad. He says, I loved it. I loved the idea of doing this, but I had to figure it out. Now, obviously, he did a pretty good job of figuring it out.
Yep.
So that leads me to my question. Did you know how to do advertising when you got into it, or did you just sort of have to figure it out? How did that happen for you?
Well, Tom got into it. He was like a generation before me. I met with him last summer out in Minneapolis. Had lunch at his house. I got to show you something. Oh, don't go anywhere. Let me show you this.
This is a first?
That's one of my prized possessions. This is he learned to throw pots when he was living in Hawaii. Whoop.
Okay. This is a first. This is a first for us, Luke.
Show and tell.
Prize possession. When he hired me, and I write about this in the first chapter of the book, he called the award annuals the Graduate School of Advertising. That's what it was then and is now. It really is. I, to this day, can say that if you could get yourself the first 25, 30 years of the one show annuals, CA annual December issues, you could teach yourself how to do it. Because that's, as I told my students, you're apprentices, you study from the masters. That's how you do it. And so at the time when I joined back in the year 1979, that's my second effect today, he gave me his current stack, which is only about this tall, and put me out on what they called the creative balcony in the agency in Minneapolis, and just said, he didn't have work for me. The job orders hadn't come through yet. And he just said, read them all. And by reading them all, he meant read the body copy, learn who the agencies are, learn who the great writers are, read the scripts, read the radio, read all of it word for word. And I did that for 30 years straight. It's like learning any language. It just soaks in. You immerse yourself in it. And so that's how it started with Tom. You had an original question. How did he learn how to do it? He too studied those same books. He had a slightly smaller stack than I had to work with. And the students today just have all of them. Now they have all these wonderful online places to go study fantastic work.
I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, and I think there's a lot of parallels with copywriting and writing and performing stand-up comedy. And I think one of them is that when you're first starting out, I think the tendency is to copy what you see as greatness, like not necessarily stealing material, but the style, right? Like, and I've heard comics talk about it as like, oh, I look at my early stuff and I'm embarrassed because I was imitating Jerry Seinfeld, or I was imitating Richard Pryor, or I was imitating whoever the top comic was at the time. And I got to believe that there's a little bit of that. I'm not a copywriter, I'm a strategist, a planner. But I got to believe there's a little bit of that, finding your own voice, finding your own style in the early years of particularly a copywriting career. But I would think with art direction as well, right? Like finding your own eclectic or taking in from other people and kind of forging your own unique way of looking at things.
That's true in every artistic endeavor, whether you're an artist,
It's about finding your vocabulary. I mean, people use different terms, but it's about finding your voice, finding your vocabulary. I mean, any great writer, and I think, Luke, you'd agree with me, whether you're a poet or a librettist or a copywriter, is going to study the people that you admire, or even that you just had never heard of, to find out what are they doing, how are they doing it. When I studied poetry in college, I would literally write out, by hand, on a piece of paper, some of my favorite poems, to get a sense of how it felt coming off the tip of my pencil or my pen. You get a tactile sensation of what those words mean coming together.
The Beatles did that with, I think that's how Paul was accepted into the Beatles, when he showed John a certain guitar passage. I think it might have been from, I don't know, some American black rock and roll star, like, I forget some of the early ones the Beatles just loved. And Paul copied that and just showed John, what do you think? So it's true in all, in my opinion, true in all creative endeavors, is that you watch the masters, you copy the masters, and then you head out on your own. Yeah, it's all true.
Yeah. I
Well,
think
here's a question I had actually never thought about this before, and you prompted me. Could you name an example of master creative brief writers?
No, I couldn't off the top of my head.
And neither can I. And it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, Henry commented on this in our last episode. It's like when great creative emerges from a brief, we don't remember the brief writer. We remember the creative, right? And his point wasn't to denigrate strategy and brief writers and briefs. It was to say that it's basically the first step. It's supposed to prompt the great thinking, but it's still an important function in the whole creative process. It is the first step of the creative process. Sir John Haggerty says as much, but we just don't remember who the great brief writers were. Sadly, they're not signed like a great art.
Wasn't it Haggerty who said the first a brief is the first creative act?
It's the first ad. Yeah. He said, I'll take the proposition. I take the proposition from the brief. I'll write that on a piece of paper and I'll put a picture of the product above or below it and I'll stick that on the wall. And my first question is it a good ad? It doesn't have to be great. It's just a good ad. Then my job, assuming it's good, is to make it great.
If it doesn't,
but we don't sign our ads and we don't sign our briefs. So we do this anonymously.
Yeah.
The way that for me, I know when I'm doing well is when creatives want to work with me, and when they come to me, and that's when I know I'm doing a good job, right? And when I join an agency and my reputation precedes me and people are glad that I'm there because they recognize that they were missing something in terms of strategy, that has been the reward that I get. I don't need to have my name in the annual, but there's definitely, for me, there's a reward there as a brief writer, knowing that I'm desired as
the deal is you're desired by good creatives because, in my opinion, the clients are going to listen to you more than me. Clients are going to believe you more than me. Your finger is in the stream of customers. I'd like to think creatives should be as well, but they just believe strategists are more on their side because they can talk in their language.
And that's the way I've always seen the role of a strategist at an agency. Is we have to walk like we're walking like on the equator, with one foot on the north hemisphere and one foot on the south hemisphere. And the north hemisphere is the business world, the client's business, the trends, the consumers, and then there's that creative, artistic world. And I got to be able to speak language on both sides of that and marry those things together. Now, we've also, this has been a recurring theme of the podcast as well, is that every person that works at an agency has different strengths and weaknesses. So there are some creatives that are very strategic. They understand business. They understand, looking at Bill Bernbach wasn't just a great creative. He was a businessman. He knew, what the clients were looking for in terms of a business result as a result of communications. He wasn't just an artistic guy or a word guy. And so in my mind, a lot of the great creatives are also people that understand business. They're not just isolated in that world, but I think a good strategist can help make up for some of those shortcomings, if there are, in the creative department, when they seem too focused on the abstractions rather than the real world problems.
Smaller, sort of laboratory level. I didn't teach freshmen or sophomores very long in intro, but in intro, I had to teach my first two lectures. The first lecture was on authenticity and just getting rid of bullshit, which is what most people think advertising is. And they sit down and produce an ad, which it's always bullshit. The second lecture was on strategy, because we can't do an ad until we know what we're going to say, to whom we're going to say it, and something about how we're going to say it. Most kids bored by that. They just wanted to jump to, come on, let's do some ads. And it was always a mistake. Half the time I sensed that kids did an execution first and then backed up into the strategy. And agencies have been known to do that too. And occasionally that is a fine route to take, especially if you have a nuclear idea that just is impressive. But most of the kids were bored by the blocking and tackling, the basic stuff necessary to set up a structure from which you can make a difference.
Luke, are you familiar? We've had Matt Davies and Peter Paul Von Wheeler on our show some months ago. They are the founders of a project called the Better Briefs Project. They did a global survey of ad agencies and marketers about their attitudes toward the marketing brief, not the creative brief, but the marketing brief, the brief that comes from the client to the agency, to assess their self-awareness of the brief as well as the creative's review of the brief. And the gap between how the marketers felt the quality of their briefs was way up here, and the agencies was, now you really don't know what you're doing. I mean, it was 70 or 80 point difference, huge. One of the most interesting points of the survey was 60% of marketers admitted that they used the creative process to figure out the strategy. They just threw the brief at the agency, and then in the iterations of work going back and forth,
I'll like it when I see it, is basically.
Yeah. And then, of course, another great point was 30% marketers had realized that 30% of their budget was wasted because of bad briefs. So it's not just kids. It's not just your kids who are like, I just want to jump in and do ads. It's like marketers today, mid-level, senior level marketers, don't know what they're doing. And I encounter this all the time in my training. The gap between, a marketer who says, yeah, but advertising is just subjective. So if I don't see what I want, it's the creative's fault. If wishing made it that simple, right? Well, so I guess this boils down to the question, have you seen an evolution in the way kids today, or over the course of your teaching career, have they evolved in their thinking? Are they still just want to jump in and do ads and they're not interested in the nuts and bolts?
I generally think it's just youth talking. It's not my particular students or this school. It's just youth. The fun part, the reason why we get into this business is not is because we want to color. We want to color in and color the page. We want to make things. We don't become an art major because I want to become a docent at a museum. I want to paint, right? So
yeah, but your analogy of the Beatles earlier is a perfect one, right? And we've heard, like the Malcolm Gladwell thing, like where did the Beatles become a band, a creative force? They become that in Hamburg, Germany, where they're gigging every night of the week and they're grinding and they're learning basic things. They're repeating the same songs over and over again because that's how they get to become the most influential band in the history of the world.
Right.
You can't compare the early material to the late material in terms of its sophistication, its emotional appeal. To me that there's a big parallel. I mean, the natural human state is instant gratification, but you can't get to the level that you want to get to unless you put in the hours. I mean, I'm a frustrated musician. I've tried different instruments. I just don't have the patience to learn all the rudimentary aspects of it. I just wish I was a rock star, and it doesn't work that way. And so I think
Do you remember?
Do I remember what?
A good point. The 10,000 hours that was Maxwell. Was his 10,000 hours of pure practice.
Malcolm Gladwell, yeah.
Qualifies you for. Do you remember that on that TV video game Guitar Hero? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could play, a Stairway to Heaven, the solo by Jimmy, what's his name? Just
Jimmy
by
Page.
following the things. You didn't have to learn how to play a guitar, but if you just follow the dots, we want to do that. We want to short circuit the process that it takes to get to be a master. And you can do that for a minute, and you might be able to make one painting, you might be able to do one ad, but in order to be a professional, no, you have to put in the 10,000 hours.
Well, speaking of that, one of the things we've also talked about is the state of training, and that's where you come in, or had come in for the last 10 years, and I do it to a certain extent as well, usually with mid-level, sometimes entry-level marketers and some creators, the training I do with the ANA. We've had guests in past episodes where we talk about the challenge of training in our industry. What are some of your thoughts on the status of training? for
Um,
copywriters and art directors and strategists?
I have read, and I just read, and Nancy Vonk has a book that I just found out about. It came out in 2014, and it's called Darling, You Can't Have Both. And it's about her advice, along with Janet Keston's advice to young women, what bullshit business advice to ignore on the way up. And I just read in her book this. The average barista gets more training than most agency staffers. That was the startling headline that left off the pages of Adweek, a leading trade publication, in March 2011. That's true. I mean, you get marched through it. This is for art direction and copywriting. We try very hard to inculcate into these students the crafts of copywriting and art directing. At my school, they had to take many other classes. I would think it'd be better at a graduate school where you could focus on nothing else but the craft of copywriting, art direction, or strategy, as they do at the BC Brand Center, would result in better training. But I hear mixed results about pretty much every school out there. It always comes down to the student. But as soon as you join when I joined as a young writer under Tom McGilligut's, most agencies hire out of a sense of emergency. I just lost it. I just got a new client and I need to plug in 3 teams over here. And they hire 3 teams. Let's go, 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 go. Or I lost a team on Goodyear, and a big meeting with Goodyear is 2 weeks from now. Go, 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 go. And so I was thrown into a huge radio project that Tom didn't want anything to do with. It was really a piece of shit project. But that's how I started love affair with radio. It was crap radio. It wasn't even live radio. I mean, it was live radio. But when you're thrown in the pool, and if you teach yourself. So
right.
Where am I going with this? Some of this stuff you do need to be thrown in the pool. You just need to hammer it out and figure it out. But yes, wouldn't it be great if there was a mentoring thing throughout all agencies? And Nancy covers that well in this book.
So one of the big shortcomings I think that exists in training in agencies is the jump from being a creative to being a creative director. And I've always looked at it as, you start out as a copywriter or an art director, a junior, right? And so the first thing you're doing is, if you're good and if you're smart, you're doing what you said, right? You're looking at the best work. You're working on your craft. You're putting in the 10,000 hours of just writing copy or directing art, and you're doing that, and you're becoming a craftsman or a craftswoman. And over time, you get really good at that. And then, so you get this promotion from junior to copywriter to senior copywriter. And then at some point, the next promotion is associate creative director or creative director. And the problem is that a director is a completely different role, right? It's managing of people, timelines, and budgets. And you never took a class on how to manage people, how to manage timelines, and how to manage budgets. And so, my advice, and I've spoken, to the Miami Ad School, to their art direction and copywriting students. I've spoken to the Florida State University Advertising Club, is nobody's going to teach you to be a good creative director. You have to teach yourself. So early on, analyze your creative directors. What do they do that's good? What do they do that's bad? What are their shortcomings? Because that to me is a big part, is because moving into more of a management role as opposed to a creative role, they're hardly ever prepared for that move.
Totally different. I was a copywriter for 17 years of my 33 years in the business, and I went from copywriter to chief creative officer. It was my neck hurt when I took that left turn. And that is correct. You are not qualified to be a creative director just because you were, say, a very good copywriter, which I was pretty good. But I was a weak creative director for quite a while. maybe my entire career. I think as a creative director, I wanted too much to be liked. I wanted to be liked. I inherited, I thought, a very bad creative department, and I had to lose a bunch of them. This is at the agency that must not be named, and I had to fire a bunch of them. But the ones that I kept were either pretty good or I thought could be good, and I didn't want to alienate them by just sending them back in the back, in the back, in the back, in the back, which I should have done, and I didn't do that. And so the work suffered for that. That agency moved from an F agency to, and not just because of me, but other good people, to on a good day, a B. It took 4.5 years to even do that. Where was I going with this? Oh, yes, being a so-so creative director. I wanted too much to be liked. I think if I could have taken my friend Markham Cronin's advice, who worked at Crispin and seen how Bogusky worked, Bogusky did not mind making everybody work over Christmas. During their kids' surgery, you come in and you'd work.
My wife worked at Crispin in the account team for a little while, in around 2010, and yeah, it's definitely an intense environment.
When you do your 7th edition of your book, you can refer to the agency that must not be named as Voldemort, Wormtail, and Partners.
Yes, very good. Martini, Yes Men, and Long Launches was the one I used to use.
So what is your assessment of the state of the industry, and are you hopeful? Are you pessimistic?
I'm always hopeful. The deal is the world is like this. It's just going to come and go, come and go. You know, the Democrats are going to be in charge now. It's the Republicans. Who knows if the Republicans have their way? Nobody will be. But I see the world going like this. I don't. Anybody who knows anything, if you look at how books sell or movies sell, people love story. They just love story. They love to be entertained. So I think that won't change. I think people who want to sell their wares are figuring out more and more this is where they have to be. They have to entertain. Otherwise, they won't have an audience. So there's going to be some clients that are always going to know that and just instinctively trust, if they're working with good agencies, to do that mix that it takes to, number one, get foot traffic in the door. On the other side, build a brand narrative that keeps the brand alive and relevant on people's pull-down menus. So I don't think that that's going to change. I'm not too, this is probably where somebody's going to chisel this in my gravestone when I say I'm not too worried about this programmatic AI advertising.
Oh, yeah.
It reminds me of that great AI ad. I think that my friend Ansel Ramos's agency did. It was a Burger King ad written by AI. Look that up sometime. It's absolutely a scream. It's the AI voice, and it just uses all the pieces and parts that you're supposed to use to make a burger commercial. I'm not too worried about that. I think it's very useful programmatic advertising in terms of buying media and bidding for those all the places you need to bid in order to get good media placement. That doesn't worry me. What does worry me, and it continues to worry me, is the ability of people to read and write. A literate citizenry and a literate industry full of people who know how to read and write. I see it. One of my favorite, this is a thing that I see coming, and I've been saying this for several years. What I do see ahead is the rise of stupid, and I mean good stupid. Good stupid. Good stupid is Geico. Now, Geico actually isn't quite stupid. Geico, you can name the strategy. Everybody in America can say the strategy, the creative brief behind Geico. Stupid is anything Barton F. Graff did. Stupid is anything Skittles. Stupid is most of the stuff that you get sent on your email. Look at this fucking thing. And people send out stupid stuff. We love stupid. It makes our computers spasm as we try to process it. Stupid.
But haven't we always, though? Three Stooges, right? I mean, I think the point, and one of the things that you mentioned, I mean, we've had Paul Feldwick on the show, and the idea of advertising as entertainment, and that when you entertain consumers, you keep your brand before the public. You're basically that pull down menu that you mentioned. So I'm definitely on board with that. I don't think that the stupid tone is the right tone for every brand, right?
Agreed.
But in
Yep.
certain if you're selling Skittles, I mean, what are Skittles? They're little sugar, things,
Yeah.
right? So why again, I think that the best advertising is when it matches the brand authentically with a tone that is remembered and entertaining, and that tone can be different. It could be serious, it could be emotional, it could be knee slap, it could be you know. And earlier when we were talking kind of about the evolution of the industry, I was also thinking about how the types of advertising come in waves, right? Like, there was that 60s creative revolution out of New York that was a very specific, that Bernbach style of copywriting that was, very cynical, very funny, in a very clever way. And then everybody started doing that, and it became less and less original. So in order to be noticed, you have to break out of that. And I think that is one of the exciting things about the industry, is that there's always room for something different, because different is what gets you noticed.
Yep. Speaking of stupid, if you'll put up on your screen here now an ad I did for my own stupid book. It's going to run on LinkedIn, and as you can see, it's just a TV screen with the image of my book, and the headline is "Live Feed of Popular Ad Text," and it's just TV. It's just fucking stupid. It's stupid. It doesn't even mention the name. You can see the name of the thing. It's just stupid. Here's another one. This one's the stupidest of all. And this is for Instagram. Okay, as you can see, there's a copy of the book there, and then there's that QR code. Okay, that's the image. Above that, it's going to say, "Get $10 off. Get $10 off the new. Get $10 off. Just point your phone at this QR code." Oh wait, you can't point. It's just stupid. It's just fucking stupid. And I just think my book isn't about being stupid. I think it's a fairly intellectual exercise. The best advertising takes a clear brain, pursuing a single-minded proposition and doing it in a really amazing way. And yet, all my ads are about that stupid.
Well, I don't want to end on stupid, but I think
stupid's good.
It's good. Luke, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with
Hey,
us.
Whipple, squeeze this.
Yeah.
Yep. 6th edition coming out February.
That's right.
February
23rd.
February 23rd. So, folks, line up at your favorite bookstore or get your pre-order in on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you get your books today. And I have a side gig as a voiceover, probably not doing too well. But listen, Luke Sullivan, former professor, former copywriter, former creative, brilliant lead, and wonderful author. Thank you for joining us today.
Guys, it's a pleasure to meet both of you face to face. You, Henry, for the first time, and Howard, we've been in contact off and on for several years. So a pleasure was mine, guys.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Keep up the good work.
We appreciate it. Okay, take care. Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.